The waiter's eyes went wide as he read the name on my reservation. Behind me, my family was still laughing about how I could barely afford Olive Garden. What they didn't know was that I owned the most exclusive restaurant in the city, and they were about to find out in the most humiliating way possible. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. I was arranging the small succulents on my apartment windowsill when my phone buzzed. Mom's name flashed across the screen, and I already knew what this was about. She only called on Sunday afternoons when she needed something, usually something that involved me pretending everything was normal between us. "Emma, honey," she said, her voice carrying that fake sweetness that meant she was about to ask for a favor. "I hope you're not too busy with your little projects." My little projects. That's what she called my work. I ran my finger along the edge of a jade plant and waited for her to get to the point. "Your cousin Derek got that promotion at the law firm," she continued. "Partner track, can you believe it? Anyway, his girlfriend Madison. You remember Madison, the one with the beautiful blonde hair? She suggested we celebrate at Le Bernardin for Derek's birthday next Saturday." Le Bernardin, of course it was Le Bernardin. The most exclusive French restaurant in downtown Chicago, where reservations were booked 3 months out, and the waiting list read like a Forbes directory. "That sounds nice, Mom," I said, though we both knew I had no intention of going. "Well, here's the thing," she said, and I could practically hear her wringing her hands through the phone. "Madison already made the reservation for 8 people, but now she's realized how expensive it's going to be. The prix-fixe menu is $185 per person, plus wine pairings, plus tax and tip." I did the math in my head. Nearly $2,000 for dinner. I also knew exactly where this conversation was heading. "I was hoping," Mom continued, "since you don't have a family of your own to support, and with your situation, maybe you could help cover some of the cost? Just this once? Derek's been so successful, and Madison comes from such a lovely family. Her father owns 3 car dealerships, you know. My situation." That was her polite way of referring to the fact that I was 32, unmarried, and as far as they knew, barely scraping by as a freelance food blogger. It was easier to let them believe that than to explain the truth. "I don't know, Mom. Le Bernardin is pretty expensive for my budget." She sighed, that long-suffering sound she'd perfected over the years. "Emma, sweetheart, I know things have been tight for you since you left that nice marketing job to chase your food writing dream. But this is family. Derek has always been so good to everyone. Remember when he helped you move into your first apartment?" I remembered. Derek had shown up 2 hours late, complained about the stairs, and left after carrying exactly 1 box. But family mythology had a way of reshaping these stories into something more generous. "Besides," Mom added, "it would be good for you to get out and socialize. Meet some of Derek's professional friends. Madison knows so many successful young men in the finance world." There it was, the real reason for the invitation. Not because they wanted my company, but because they thought I needed their charity and their connections. Because in their minds, I was the family failure who needed rescuing. "Okay," I said quietly, "I'll come." "Oh, wonderful." Mom's voice brightened immediately. "And you'll help with the bill? Maybe split it with Derek and Madison? They're already paying for so much with the wedding planning." The wedding planning. Derek and Madison had been engaged for 8 months, and every family gathering had become a referendum on their perfect relationship, their perfect careers, their perfect future. Meanwhile, I sat in the corner, the cautionary tale of what happened when you didn't follow the prescribed path. "I'll figure something out," I told her. After I hung up, I sat in the quiet of my small apartment and looked around at what Mom called my little projects, the meticulously organized spice collection that took up 1 entire wall, the professional-grade knife set that had cost more than most people's monthly rent, the stack of culinary textbooks in 3 languages that I'd collected over the years. She had no idea that I'd been writing restaurant reviews under a pseudonym for 5 years, or that my blog Anonymous Appetite had become one of the most influential food review sites in the Midwest. She didn't know that I'd consulted for dozens of restaurants, helping them refine their menus and train their staff. And she definitely didn't know about the investment I'd made 2 years ago, the one that had changed everything. I pulled out my laptop and opened my email. There was a message from Jean-Luc Moreau, the head chef at Les Bernardins, confirming our meeting for Thursday. He wanted to discuss the new seasonal menu and get my approval for the wine selections. As the silent partner who owned 60% of the restaurant, I had final say on all major decisions, though I preferred to let Jean-Luc handle the day-to-day operations. Most people assumed Le Bernardin was owned by some wealthy businessman or a corporate restaurant group. The truth was more complicated. 2 years ago, the original owner had faced bankruptcy after a series of bad investments. The restaurant was hemorrhaging money despite its stellar reputation, and the staff was on the verge of losing their jobs. I'd been reviewing restaurants professionally for 3 years by then, and I'd built up a significant nest egg from my consulting work and some smart cryptocurrency investments I'd made early on. When I heard through industry contacts that Le Bernardin was in trouble, I saw an opportunity. The purchase was structured as a silent partnership. Jean-Luc would continue as head chef and public face of the restaurant, while I provided the capital and strategic oversight. We rebuilt the business from the ground up, refined the menu, retrained the staff, and within 18 months, Le Bernardin had not only recovered, but become the most sought-after dining destination in the city. The best part was the anonymity. I could continue my work as a food critic without the conflict of interest that would come with being a known restaurant owner. And my family could continue to see me as their underachieving relative who wrote about food for a living. I closed the laptop and walked to my bedroom closet. Hanging in the back, still in its garment bag, was a black cocktail dress I'd bought for industry events but never worn to family gatherings. For Saturday night, I'd stick with my usual understated style, the look of someone who was grateful to be included rather than someone who belonged. The irony wasn't lost on me. In a few days, I'd be sitting at a table in my own restaurant, listening to my family mock my career choices and relationship status. While they praised Derek's success and Madison's perfect life, they'd probably make jokes about how I could never afford to eat at a place like this on my own. And I'd smile and nod and play my part, because sometimes the best revenge is letting people reveal exactly who they are when they think you're not watching. My phone buzzed with a text from Derek. Looking forward to Saturday. Hope you can swing it financially. I know Le Bernardin is pretty upscale for you. Maybe we can split an appetizer or something? I stared at the message for a long moment, then typed back, "Don't worry about me, I'll manage." That was the understatement of the year. Thursday came quickly, and I took the L downtown to meet with Jean-Luc. Les Bernardins occupied the ground floor of a historic building in River North, its understated exterior giving no hint of the culinary magic that happened inside. I used the staff entrance in the alley, a habit I'd developed to avoid being seen by food bloggers or industry contacts who might recognize me. Jean-Luc was waiting in his office, a small space behind the kitchen that was chaos organized into something resembling order. Recipe cards covered one wall, supplier invoices were stacked on his desk, and the air smelled like the garlic and thyme he'd been testing for the new spring menu. "Emma," he said, standing to greet me with the kind of warm handshake that had made him beloved by his staff. "Thank you for coming. I wanted to go over the changes we discussed for the prix-fixe menu." We spent an hour tasting dishes and discussing wine pairings. Jean-Luc had a gift for balancing innovation with the classical French techniques that had made Le Bernardin famous. Under his leadership, the restaurant had earned its first Michelin star 6 months ago, an achievement that had made the local food scene take notice. "There is one other thing," Jean-Luc said as we finished reviewing the financial reports. "We have been getting requests for private events. Wealthy families wanting to book the entire restaurant for celebrations. The profit margins would be excellent, but I wanted to check with you first." I considered this. Private events could be lucrative, but they also meant displacing regular customers and potentially changing the intimate atmosphere that made Le Bernardin special. "What kind of events?" I asked. "Birthday parties, anniversary celebrations, engagement dinners. The type of people who want to impress their guests with an exclusive experience. People like my family," I thought. People who equated expensive with impressive, who saw a restaurant like Le Bernardin as a status symbol, rather than a place where food was elevated to art. "Let's start small," I said. "Maybe one private event per month, only on slower nights, and make sure the staff gets a generous tip pool from those bookings." Jean-Luc nodded and made a note. "You know," he said, looking up from his papers, "I have always been curious about something. You know more about the restaurant business than most owners I have worked with, but you never talk about your background. Were you in hospitality before this?" I smiled. It was a question he'd asked before, always politely, never pushily. "I've been around food my whole life," I said, which was true enough. I just never found the right opportunity to get involved in the business side until now. He seemed satisfied with that answer, as he always was. Jean-Luc understood the value of mystery in the restaurant world. Sometimes the less people knew about you, the more interested they became in what you had to offer. As I prepared to leave, he handed me a folder. "The reservation list for Saturday night," he said. "I thought you might want to review it." I flipped through the pages, scanning the names of Chicago's elite. Politicians, celebrities, business leaders. The usual crowd for a Saturday evening at Le Bernardin. And there, near the bottom of the list, I saw it. Derek Patterson, party of 8, 7:30 p.m. "This table," I said, pointing to the entry. "What do you know about them?" Jean-Luc consulted his notes. "Birthday celebration." The young woman who made the reservation was very specific about wanting the best table in the house. She mentioned several times that money was no object, though she also asked about our most expensive wine selections. Madison. Of course she'd want to make an impression, even if she expected me to help pay for it. "Make sure they get excellent service," I said, "but don't go overboard. Treat them like any other guests." As I walked back through the kitchen toward the staff exit, I watched the prep cooks working on tomorrow's amuse-bouches, their movements precise and efficient. This was my world, even if my family would never see it that way. In 2 days, I'd be sitting at table 12, listening to them make jokes about my unsuccessful life, while the staff I employed served us food I'd helped create in a restaurant I owned. The thought should have made me angry, but instead I felt something else entirely. Anticipation. Because for the first time in years, I was going to let my family see exactly who they'd been underestimating. Not all at once. Not dramatically. Just enough to make them wonder if they'd been wrong about everything they thought they knew about me. Saturday was going to be very interesting indeed. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Saturday arrived with the kind of gray October sky that made Chicago feel smaller and meaner than usual. I spent the morning at Lincoln Park Zoo, not because I particularly wanted to see the animals, but because I needed somewhere quiet to think. The penguins were huddled together against the cold, and I found myself envying their simplicity. No complicated family dynamics, no secret identities, just the basic need for warmth and food. My phone had been buzzing all morning with texts from various family members. Derek wanted to know if I could arrive early to help figure out the wine situation. Madison sent a photo of her outfit with the caption, "Trying to look worthy of Le Bernardin." And Mom had called twice to remind me to dress appropriately and maybe do something with your hair. At noon, I walked back to my apartment and stood in front of my closet. The black cocktail dress hung there like a question mark. Too fancy. And they'd wonder where I got the money. Too casual, and I'd never hear the end of it. I settled on a navy blue wrap dress that looked expensive, but not impossibly so, paired with the pearl earrings my grandmother had left me. Conservative enough to blend in, but nice enough to show I'd made an effort. As I was getting ready, my phone rang. It was my sister Jessica, calling from Portland where she lived with her husband and 2 kids. "Hey, Em," she said, and I could hear my nephew practicing violin in the background. "Mom told me about tonight. You sure you want to put yourself through this?" Jessica was the only family member who understood what these gatherings were really like. She'd escaped to the West Coast 5 years ago, ostensibly for her husband's job, but we both knew it was really to get away from the constant comparisons and competitions that defined our family dynamics. "It's Derek's birthday," I said, applying mascara with one hand while holding the phone with the other. "I can't skip it entirely." "You could," she pointed out. "You're an adult. You could develop a sudden case of food poisoning." I laughed despite myself. "And miss the chance to eat at Le Bernardin? I've been wanting to try their new seasonal menu." Right, because you're such a foodie now, Jessica said, but her tone was affectionate rather than mocking. She was one of the few people who took my food writing seriously, even if she didn't know the full extent of my involvement in the industry. Just promise me you won't let them get to you. You know how they are when they get Derek and Madison together? It's like watching a mutual admiration society. After we hung up, I sat on my bed and looked at my reflection in the full-length mirror. The woman staring back at me looked polished but unremarkable. Someone who belonged in the background of other people's success stories. It was a carefully cultivated image, one I'd perfected over years of family gatherings, where standing out meant becoming a target. At 3 p.m., I took the L downtown, choosing to arrive early so I could walk past Le Bernardin and see it through fresh eyes. The restaurant looked different on Saturday afternoon. More bustling, more alive. Through the large windows, I could see the staff setting up for the dinner service, their movements choreographed with the precision that came from months of working together. I walked around the block twice, then ducked into a coffee shop across the street to wait. From my window seat, I could watch the early diners arriving. Well-dressed couples, business groups, families celebrating special occasions. People who saw Le Bernardin as the pinnacle of dining, a place reserved for life's most important moments. My phone buzzed with a text from Derek. Running a few minutes late. Madison is having a wardrobe crisis, LOL. Can you check us in? I stared at the message for a moment. Check them in, as if I were the advance scout, clearing the way for the important people. It was such a small thing, but it perfectly captured how my family saw my role in their lives. Sure, I texted back. No problem. At 7:15, I crossed the street and approached Le Bernardin's entrance. The hostess was someone I didn't recognize, probably new since my last visit. She was young, maybe early 20s, with the kind of nervous energy that suggested she was still learning the intricate dance of managing reservations at an upscale restaurant. Good evening, she said with a bright smile. Do you have a reservation? Patterson party, I said. Table for 8 at 7:30. She consulted her book, running her finger down the page. Yes, here you are. The birthday celebration. Are you the first to arrive? I nodded, and she led me through the dining room to table 12. It was indeed one of the best tables in the house, positioned near the windows with a view of the kitchen, but not so close to the action that conversation would be difficult. Madison had chosen well, even if she'd probably demanded this table specifically because she thought it made them look important. Can I start you with something to drink while you wait for the rest of your party? The hostess asked. Just water for now, I said, settling into my chair. They should be here soon. As she walked away, I looked around the dining room with the eye of an owner rather than a guest. The evening service was running smoothly. Servers moved between tables with quiet efficiency. The sommelier was discussing wine selections with a couple at table 4, and the soft lighting created an atmosphere that was elegant without being stuffy. Jean-Luc appeared briefly in the kitchen window, surveying his domain with the focused intensity that had made him one of Chicago's most respected chefs. He caught my eye and gave a small nod. Not unusual for him to acknowledge regular customers, but I wondered if he'd remember that I was here with family tonight. At 7:45, the rest of my family finally arrived in a burst of energy and apologies. Derek led the charge, looking every inch the successful young lawyer in his tailored suit and expensive watch. Behind him, Madison practically glowed in a red dress that probably cost more than my rent, her engagement ring catching the light as she gestured animatedly. Mom and Dad followed, both dressed more formally than I'd seen them in years. Mom was wearing the black dress she'd bought for Jessica's wedding, and Dad had actually traded his usual polo shirt for a button-down and tie. They looked nervous and excited, like they were about to meet celebrities. Bringing up the rear were Derek's law school friends, Brad and Tyler, with their respective girlfriends, Stephanie and Ashley. The entire group radiated the kind of confident prosperity that comes from never having to check your bank balance before making plans. Emma, Madison squealed, rushing over to hug me. You look so nice. I love that dress. Is it from Target? Target has such cute stuff now. Before I could answer, Derek was pulling out Madison's chair and making a show of seating her like she was royalty. Sorry we're late, Em. Madison couldn't decide between the red dress and the black one, and honestly, I told her she looks incredible in both. But you know how women are about these decisions. The group laughed as if this were the height of wit. I smiled and nodded, playing my part in the familiar script. "This place is amazing," Brad said, looking around with the wide eyes of someone who'd clearly never been anywhere like this before. "I can't believe you guys could get a reservation. Don't they have like a 6-month waiting list?" "Madison has connections," Derek said proudly, reaching over to squeeze her hand. "Her dad knows people in the hospitality industry." I glanced at Madison, who was preening under the attention. Her father owned car dealerships, not restaurants, but I supposed that counted as connections in their world. "Well, I just think it's so sweet that Emma could join us," Mom said, settling into her chair. "It's not often she gets to experience somewhere this upscale." There it was, less than 5 minutes into the evening, and already the subtle digs were beginning. Emma, so grateful to be included in experiences she couldn't afford on her own. The sommelier approached our table with the wine list, a leather-bound tome that contained some of the finest selections in the city. I knew every bottle on those pages, had personally approved the additions to the wine program over the past year. "Good evening," he said with professional warmth. "I'm Marcus, your sommelier for this evening. Would you like to start with champagne to celebrate, or would you prefer to look at our wine selections?" Derek immediately reached for the wine list. "Let's see what we're working with here," he said, opening it with the air of someone who knew what he was doing. His face went slightly pale as he scanned the prices. "Maybe we should start with something modest," Dad suggested, clearly having caught Derek's expression. "Emma, what's your budget looking like for tonight?" All eyes turned to me. This was the moment I'd been anticipating and dreading in equal measure. The moment when they'd reduce me to a dollar amount. When they'd calculate exactly how much charity they'd need to extend to include me in their celebration. "Don't worry about me," I said quietly. "Order whatever you'd like." Madison leaned forward conspiratorially. "Actually, I looked up this place online, and I think we might be able to do the prix menu and maybe share a couple bottles of wine. It'll still be expensive, but if we all chip in." She was trying to be helpful, I realized. In her mind, she was solving a problem, finding a way to include the poor relative without breaking anyone's bank. It was almost sweet, in its complete misunderstanding of the situation. "The prefix is perfect," I said, "and please don't worry about the wine. I'd like to contribute to Derek's celebration." Derek grinned. "See, I knew my little sister would come through. That's why Emma's the best, always looking out for family." The sommelier waited patiently through this entire exchange, his professional demeanor never wavering despite what must have been an awkward conversation to witness. When they finally settled on 2 bottles of wine, a reasonably priced Sancerre and a mid-range Bordeaux, I saw him make a note on his pad. As the evening progressed, the subtle warnings, signs of what was to come, became more apparent. Madison dominated the conversation with stories about their wedding planning, her voice getting slightly louder with each glass of wine. Derek basked in the attention, occasionally throwing out details about his recent cases or his promotion timeline. "You know what's funny?" Tyler said during a lull in the conversation. "I was telling my colleague about tonight, and he was like, 'Le Bernardin? Damn, your friends must be loaded.' I had to explain that it's Derek's birthday and we're all chipping in." "It's really generous of everyone," Ashley added, glancing meaningfully at me. "Especially for Emma to stretch her budget like this. Food blogging must not pay very well." There was a moment of silence as this observation hung in the air. Mom looked embarrassed, Dad studied his wine glass, and Derek cleared his throat uncomfortably. "Emma's doing great with her writing," he said. But his tone suggested he was trying to convince himself as much as anyone else. "And hey, she's here, right? That's what matters." The conversation moved on, but I noticed the shift, the subtle acknowledgement that I was the charity case at the table, the one they had to accommodate and feel sorry for. It was a familiar role, one I'd been playing for so long that it had become second nature. But tonight felt different. Maybe it was sitting in my own restaurant, surrounded by staff I employed, and eating food I'd helped create. Maybe it was the knowledge that every dollar they spent tonight was ultimately flowing back to me. Or maybe it was simply that I was tired of being underestimated. As Marcus returned to refill our wine glasses, he caught my eye for just a moment. There was something in his expression, a flicker of recognition perhaps, or simply professional awareness, that there was more to this table than met the eye. The first course arrived, and the conversation temporarily shifted to appreciative murmurs about the food. But I could feel the undercurrent building, the way it always did at family gatherings when alcohol loosened tongues and old resentments bubbled to the surface. The real show was just beginning. The second course had just been cleared when Madison's phone lit up with notifications. She glanced at it, then squealed with excitement, nearly knocking over her wine glass. "Oh my God, Derek, look!" She thrust her phone toward him, her voice carrying across the dining room. "Jennifer just posted photos from her dinner at the French Laundry. Can you believe she's in Napa without telling us?" Derek squinted at the screen, then passed the phone around the table. "Wow, that looks incredible. How much do you think that cost them?" "The tasting menu there is like $400 per person," Brad said knowingly, "plus wine pairings, plus travel. Jennifer's husband must be doing really well with that tech startup." I watched the phone make its way around the table, each person examining Jennifer's Instagram posts with a mixture of admiration and envy. When it reached me, I saw the familiar plated presentations and elegant dining room of Thomas Keller's flagship restaurant. Beautiful food, certainly, but I'd eaten there twice for industry events and found it somewhat predictable. "Emma probably knows all about places like this," Mom said with forced brightness. "Don't you write about fancy restaurants sometimes?" All eyes turned to me, and I felt the familiar weight of their expectations. They wanted me to be impressed, to gush about how amazing Jennifer's dinner looked, to confirm that this was indeed the pinnacle of dining experiences. "The French Laundry has an excellent reputation," I said carefully. "Thomas Keller is very respected in the industry." "Industry," Tyler laughed, taking another sip of wine. "Listen to her talk like she's some kind of food expert. What industry, Emma? The food blog industry?" The table went quiet for a moment. Ashley elbowed Tyler in the ribs, but he just shrugged. "What? I'm just saying, it's not like she's actually in the restaurant business. She writes reviews on the internet." "Tyler," Derek said uncomfortably. "Come on, man." No, it's fine," Madison said, her voice taking on that patronizing tone people use when they're about to say something particularly condescending. "Emma's blog is really cute. I read it sometimes. What's it called again? Something about appetites?" My throat tightened. Madison had never read my blog. She didn't even know the correct name. But she was performing concern, the way people do when they want to seem supportive while actually highlighting your failures. "It's just a hobby," I said quietly. "Nothing too serious." "See, that's Emma's problem," Dad said, gesturing with his fork. "She's too modest. You should be promoting yourself more, honey. Maybe get on social media. Post some of those food pictures like Jennifer does. Build a following." "Dad's right," Derek chimed in, warming to the topic. "You've got to think bigger, Em. Madison's been helping me with my LinkedIn presence, and it's made a huge difference in how partners at the firm see me." Madison beamed at this acknowledgement. "It's all about branding yourself," she said. "Like, when people see Derek's posts, they think, quote, successful young lawyer who's going places. When they see Emma's, well, what do they think?" The question hung in the air like smoke. What did people think when they saw me? Unsuccessful, probably. Unfocused. Someone who'd chosen passion over profit and was paying the price for it. "I think they see someone who's following her dreams," Mom said weakly, but even she didn't sound convinced. "Dreams don't pay the bills," Brad said. "My cousin tried to be a photographer for like 3 years. Know what he's doing now? Insurance sales. Makes 6 figures. "That's exactly what I'm talking about," Tyler said, leaning forward with the aggressive confidence that comes from too much wine and too little self-awareness. "Emma, you're smart. You're educated. Why are you wasting your time writing about other people's restaurants when you could be doing something that actually matters?" The server appeared at that moment to present the third course, but Tyler barely acknowledged him. He was on a roll now, fueled by alcohol and the approval he was getting from the rest of the table. "I mean, think about it," he continued. "Derek's gonna make partner. Madison's father owns multiple businesses. Your parents raised 2 kids. One successful lawyer and one," he gestured vaguely in my direction, "food blogger." "Tyler," Ashley hissed, but he waved her off. "I'm trying to help her," he said. "Someone needs to give Emma a reality check. She's 32 years old, still single, living in some tiny apartment. writing about food she probably can't even afford to eat regularly. The words hit like physical blows. I felt my face flush, my hands tremble slightly as I reached for my water glass. Around the table, I could see varying degrees of discomfort on my family's faces, but no one was actually defending me. "This isn't the time or place," Derek said finally, but his tone was more embarrassed than angry. He was worried about causing a scene in the fancy restaurant, not about what Tyler was saying to his sister. "When is the time?" Tyler pressed. "Emma's been drifting for years. Food writing, restaurant reviews. It's not a career, it's an expensive hobby. And now she's here, at one of the most exclusive restaurants in Chicago, probably spending money she doesn't have to keep up appearances." Madison reached across the table and patted my hand with fake sympathy. "Tyler's being harsh, but maybe he has a point about the practical side of things. I mean, Emma, you're such a smart woman. Have you ever thought about going back to school? Getting an MBA? My sorority sister just finished her program at Northwestern, and she landed this amazing job in consulting. Or what about real estate?" Ashley added helpfully. "My mom got her license at 45 and she's doing really well. The housing market is crazy right now." They were trying to redesign my life at the dinner table, treating my choices like mistakes that needed correcting. The food critic career I'd built, the restaurant empire I secretly owned, the financial security I'd achieved, none of it mattered because they couldn't see it. "You know what the real problem is?" Tyler said, emboldened by the attention he was getting. "Emma's living in a fantasy. She thinks she's some kind of food expert because she can write a pretty sentence about a sandwich. But look around. We're at Le Bernardin, one of the best restaurants in the world, and what has Emma contributed to this dinner? Nothing. Derek and Madison are paying, your parents are paying, we're all paying. Emma's just here." The cruelty of it took my breath away. Not just the words themselves, but the casual way he said them, as if my worth as a person could be measured by my contribution to a dinner bill. "That's enough," I said quietly, but Tyler wasn't finished. "Is it though?" He leaned back in his chair, warming to his theme. "Because I think this is exactly the kind of conversation Emma needs to hear. She's been coasting on family support for years, pretending that writing restaurant reviews is a real job, while everyone else carries the financial load." "Tyler, seriously, stop," Derek said, but his protest was weak, performative. "I'm just saying what everyone's thinking," Tyler continued. "Look at this place. The servers, the chef, the sommelier. These are people with real careers in the food industry. They're not sitting at home writing blog posts about their lunch. They're actually working, actually contributing something meaningful." He gestured toward the kitchen, where Jean-Luc could be seen directing his staff through the evening service. That chef probably worked his way up from nothing. Spent years learning his craft, building his reputation. That's what success in the food world actually looks like. Not writing reviews on some website nobody reads. The irony was so complete it was almost beautiful. Tyler was lecturing me about real success in the food industry while sitting in my restaurant, eating food prepared by my head chef, served by my staff. He was using the very empire I'd built as an example of what I should aspire to become. "You're right," I said finally, my voice barely above a whisper. "The chef here has worked very hard to build something meaningful." Tyler nodded triumphantly, mistaking my agreement for capitulation. "Exactly. So maybe it's time for Emma to stop playing pretend and figure out what she actually wants to do with her life." Around the table, I could see the discomfort on my family's faces. They knew Tyler had gone too far, but they also didn't disagree with his basic premise. I was the family disappointment, the one who'd chosen the wrong path and was now paying the price for it. Mom cleared her throat nervously. "Well, I think we've gotten a bit off track. This is supposed to be Derek's birthday celebration." "You're absolutely right," Madison said quickly, eager to move past the awkwardness. "Derek, tell everyone about the case you won last week, the corporate merger thing." Derek launched into a story about his latest legal victory, and the conversation gradually shifted away from my failures. But the damage was done. Tyler had said what everyone was thinking, had voiced the judgment that hung over every family gathering. I sat quietly through the rest of the meal, nodding and smiling at appropriate moments, while the others discussed Derek's career prospects, Madison's wedding plans, and Brad's recent promotion. They had moved on from humiliating me, as if it were just another course in the meal. The main course arrived, Jean-Luc's signature duck breast with cherry gastrique, and everyone made appreciative sounds about the presentation and flavors. Tyler even made a joke about how the chef was probably making more money than me, which earned a few uncomfortable chuckles. I ate mechanically, tasting the familiar flavors of a dish I'd helped develop, surrounded by people who saw me as a cautionary tale. The food was perfect, as I knew it would be, but it might as well have been cardboard. As the server cleared our plates, I excused myself to use the restroom. In the mirror, I looked at my reflection and saw exactly what my family saw: a woman who didn't quite belong, who was grateful to be included in experiences beyond her means. But something had shifted during Tyler's attack. The humiliation I'd expected to feel was being replaced by something else. Not anger exactly, but a kind of crystalline clarity. For years I'd let them define me by their limited understanding of my life. I'd played the role of the struggling food blogger, the family charity case, the woman who needed their pity and their financial help. Tyler was right about one thing. It was time to stop playing pretend. When I returned to the table, dessert was being served. The conversation had moved on to vacation plans and weekend activities, the comfortable territory of people who never had to worry about money or success or proving their worth to their families. I watched them eat my restaurant's signature chocolate soufflé, drink wine from my carefully curated cellar, and bask in the ambiance of the business I'd built from near bankruptcy. They had no idea that every bite they took, every sip they drank, every moment of this exclusive experience was flowing through an empire I owned. The bill would come soon, and with it, the final act of this evening's performance. But for the first time in years, I wasn't dreading it. I was looking forward to it. The dessert plates had been cleared, and Madison was taking selfies with the Le Bernardin logo visible in the background when the server approached with the leather check presenter. The moment I'd been both anticipating and dreading had finally arrived. "Here we are," the server said with professional politeness, placing the bill discreetly near Derek's elbow. "Thank you for celebrating with us this evening." Derek opened the presenter with the casual confidence of someone who'd never had to worry whether their card would be declined. His face went through a series of micro-expressions as he processed the total surprise, concern, then a quick calculation of how to handle this gracefully. "Okay," he said, clearing his throat. "So the total is substantial, but it's my birthday, so let's figure this out." Madison leaned over to look at the bill, her eyes widening. "Oh wow, the wine was more than I expected, and the tax," she trailed off, clearly doing math in her head. Tyler, still riding high from his earlier performance, reached for the check. "Come on, how bad can it be? We're all adults here." He glanced at the total and whistled low. "Damn. Okay, that's definitely more than I budgeted for." The atmosphere at the table shifted subtly. The easy confidence that had carried them through dinner was replaced by the uncomfortable arithmetic of splitting an expensive bill among people with different financial situations. "Maybe we should just divide it evenly?" Ashley suggested tentatively. 8 ways? "That doesn't seem fair," Brad said quickly. "I mean, Derek and Madison ordered that bottle of champagne for the toast, and some people had more wine than others." The conversation devolved into the kind of awkward negotiation that happens when the bill arrives at a restaurant no one can really afford. People started itemizing what they'd eaten, calculating their individual contributions, trying to figure out how to split tax and tip fairly. I watched this unfold with fascination. These were successful, educated people. Lawyers, consultants, professionals, with good jobs and bright futures. But, faced with a bill that exceeded their comfort zone, they were reduced to petty calculations and careful diplomacy. "Emma," Mom said suddenly, her voice carrying that particular tone of maternal guilt deployment, "you said you wanted to contribute to Derek's celebration. How much were you thinking?" All eyes turned to me again. This was the moment they'd been building toward all evening. The point where they'd find out exactly how much charity they'd need to extend to include me in their celebration. "Actually," I said, reaching into my purse, "I'd like to take care of the entire bill." The silence that followed was profound. Tyler's fork, which he'd been using to scrape the last of his chocolate soufflé, froze halfway to his mouth. Madison's phone, which he'd been holding up for another selfie, slowly lowered to the table. "I'm sorry, what?" Derek said, blinking rapidly as if he hadn't heard correctly. The bill, I repeated calmly. I'd like to pay for dinner. It's your birthday, Derek. Let me handle it. Emma, Dad said slowly, that's very generous, but this is a lot of money. Are you sure you can? I'm sure, I said, pulling out a black American Express card and sliding it into the check presenter before anyone could object further. The card itself was unremarkable. Matte black, my name embossed in simple silver letters. But I watched Tyler's eyes focus on it with the kind of recognition that comes from knowing exactly what different credit cards signify. Is that a Centurion card? He asked quietly. I didn't answer immediately, just signaled for our server. When he approached, I handed him the check presenter with a smile. Thank you for excellent service tonight. Please add 25% gratuity. The server glanced at the card, and I saw something shift in his expression. Not surprise, exactly, but a kind of professional awareness. Of course, ma'am. I'll process this right away. As he walked away, Tyler was still staring at the spot where my card had been. Emma, he said, his earlier bravado completely gone. A Centurion card has like a $10,000 annual fee, and you have to be invited to apply. They only give them to people who spend. A lot of money, I finished for him. Yes, I know. Madison was frantically Googling something on her phone. It says here you need to spend at least $250,000 a year on your other American Express cards before they'll even consider you for a Centurion. Emma, how is that possible? The table had gone completely quiet. Even the ambient noise of the restaurant seemed muted as my family processed this new information. Everything they thought they knew about me was suddenly up for questioning. Maybe it's a mistake, Ashley said hopefully. Like, maybe the bank made an error or something? Banks don't make those kinds of errors, Brad said quietly. He worked in finance and understood the implications better than the others. Centurion cards are invitation only. You can't fake having one. Mom was looking at me like I was a stranger. Emma, honey, I don't understand. If you have that kind of credit limit, why have you been living in that tiny apartment? Why do you always say you can't afford things? It was a fair question, and one I'd been preparing to answer for years without realizing it. Because, I said simply, I've never needed to afford the things you thought I should want. Derek was still processing. But your job, food blogging doesn't pay enough for this. He gestured vaguely at the black card's ghost presence. You're right, I said. Food blogging doesn't pay enough for this. Tyler, who had been uncharacteristically quiet since seeing my card, finally found his voice again. So what's the real story, Emma? Because clearly, everything we thought we knew about your finances is wrong. Before I could answer, our server returned with the check presenter. Your card has been processed, he said, setting it down in front of me. And thank you for dining with us. Mr. Moreau wanted me to let you know that he's available if you'd like to speak with him. The mention of Jean-Luc's name sent another ripple of confusion around the table. Why would the head chef want to speak to a customer? Even a customer with a black American Express card? That's not necessary, I said, signing the receipt. Please give him my regards. Of course, Miss Chen, the server said, then paused as he realized his mistake. I apologize, Miss Patterson. I confused you with another guest. But the damage was done. I saw the moment of recognition in his eyes, followed quickly by professional embarrassment. He'd obviously recognized me from my meetings with Jean-Luc, but he'd blown my cover by almost using the wrong name. Chen? Tyler said as soon as the server was out of earshot. Why did he call you Chen? My mind raced. I could deflect, make something up about a reservation mix-up or mistaken identity. But sitting there, surrounded by the remnants of dinner and the shocked faces of my family, I realized I was tired of deflecting. Because, I said slowly, that's the name I use professionally. What do you mean, professionally? Madison asked. I looked around the table at their confused, expectant faces. These people who had spent the evening mocking my career, dismissing my choices, treating me like a charity case who needed their pity and their financial support. I mean, I said, that Emma Chen is the name on my business license. It's the name on my tax returns. It's the name that appears on property deeds and investment portfolios and partnership agreements. Derek's face was pale now. Emma, what are you talking about? The server had moved on to another table, but I could see him glancing back at us occasionally. Other staff members were also paying attention to our table, and I realized that word was probably spreading through the restaurant that something interesting was happening at table 12. "Do you want to know why I know so much about the food industry?" I asked. "Why I can tell you about Thomas Keller's reputation, or why I understand menu pricing, or why I always seem to know which restaurants are worth visiting?" No one answered, but I could see the gears turning in their heads. Tyler, in particular, was looking like he was beginning to understand that he'd made a terrible mistake. "It's because," I continued, "I don't just write about restaurants. I invest in them. I consult for them. I help them develop their menus and train their staff and navigate the business side of hospitality." Mom was shaking her head slowly. "But you never said. You always acted like..." "Like what? Like I was struggling? Like I needed your help?" I laughed, but there was no humor in it. "I let you believe what you wanted to believe, because it was easier than explaining the truth." "Which is what, exactly?" Derek asked, his lawyer instincts kicking in. He wanted facts, specifics, proof. I looked around the restaurant, at the elegant decor, the perfectly coordinated service, the sophisticated clientele. This place that they'd chosen as the pinnacle of dining, the restaurant they'd selected to impress each other and celebrate Derek's success. "The truth," I said, "is complicated." Ashley leaned forward. "Emma, you're scaring us. Just tell us what's going on." I was about to answer when I noticed Jean-Luc himself emerging from the kitchen. He was walking directly toward our table, his chef's coat pristine despite the busy evening service. Other diners were looking up as he passed, recognizing him from magazine articles and television appearances. This was not part of the plan. Jean-Luc and I had agreed that he would maintain professional distance during family dinners to preserve my anonymity. But something had clearly changed, and as I watched him approach with purpose, I realized that the careful facade I'd maintained for years was about to crumble completely. "Good evening," Jean-Luc said as he reached our table, his slight French accent adding elegance to his words. "I hope you have enjoyed your dinner tonight." The table murmured polite responses, but I could see they were all wondering why the head chef was personally visiting their table. This kind of attention was reserved for VIPs, celebrities, or very important investors. Jean-Luc's eyes met mine, and I saw a question in them. He was asking permission, giving me one last chance to maintain my cover story. I gave him a slight nod. "Ms. Patterson," he said, and I saw Tyler physically wince at the name. "Or perhaps I should say Ms. Chen. I wanted to personally thank you for joining us this evening. It is always a pleasure when the head owner dines with us." The words hung in the air like a bomb waiting to explode. "Head owner." Tyler's face went white. Madison's mouth fell open. Derek looked like he'd been struck by lightning. And me. For the first time in hours, I smiled. The seconds following Jean-Luc's revelation stretched like elastic, each face at the table cycling through disbelief, confusion, and dawning horror. Tyler's fork clattered against his dessert plate. Madison's phone slipped from her hand onto the white tablecloth. Derek opened and closed his mouth 3 times without making a sound. Jean-Luc, seemingly unaware of the bomb he'd just detonated, continued with professional warmth. "I trust everything was to your satisfaction this evening? The seasonal menu has been performing very well since we launched it last month." "I'm sorry," Derek finally managed, his voice cracking slightly. "Did you just say head owner?" Jean-Luc glanced at me, a flicker of uncertainty crossing his features. He was beginning to realize he'd walked into something more complicated than a simple family dinner. "Perhaps," he said carefully, "I should let Miss Patterson explain." "Chen," Tyler interrupted, his voice hollow. "You called her Chen earlier." The confusion in Jean-Luc's expression deepened. "I apologize, but I am not certain I understand the concern. Miss Chen is indeed the principal owner of Le Bernardin. She has been since we restructured the business 2 years ago." The words hit the table like a physical force. Mom actually recoiled in her chair. Dad's face had gone completely gray. Ashley grabbed Brad's arm so tightly I could see her knuckles turning white. "That's impossible," Madison said, her voice pitched higher than usual. "Emma's a food blogger, she writes restaurant reviews, she can't." She gestured helplessly around the elegant dining room. Jean-Luc's professional composure began to crack as he realized the gravity of whatever family drama he'd stumbled into. I believe there may be some misunderstanding. Ms. Chen has been instrumental in Le Bernardin's success. Her vision and investments saved this restaurant from bankruptcy. Tyler was staring at me like I'd grown a second head. This is insane. Emma, tell him he's wrong. Tell him this is some kind of mistake. All eyes turned to me. I could feel the weight of their expectations, their desperate need for me to laugh this off, to reveal it as an elaborate joke or a case of mistaken identity. They needed me to be the person they thought I was, the struggling food blogger who needed their charity, not the successful business owner who had been subsidizing their lifestyle in ways they couldn't even imagine. Jean-Luc, I said quietly, thank you for checking on us. Everything was excellent as always. He nodded, relief flickering across his features. Of course, I will leave you to enjoy the rest of your evening. He paused, then added, the quarterly reports are ready for your review whenever convenient. As he walked away, the silence at our table felt suffocating. Other diners were beginning to notice the tension, heads turning discreetly in our direction. I could see some of them whispering, probably wondering if they were witnessing a celebrity meltdown or some kind of family crisis. Quarterly reports, Dad repeated slowly, as if the words were in a foreign language. Emma, Mom's voice was barely a whisper. What is happening? I don't understand what's happening. Derek, ever the lawyer, had recovered enough to start asking pointed questions. If this is true, and I'm not saying it is, but if it's true, then why have you been pretending to be broke? Why did you let us think you needed financial help? Why did you move out of our house into that tiny apartment? The questions came rapid fire, each one revealing another layer of their confusion and growing anger. Because that's what this was becoming. Not relief that I was successful, not joy that their daughter and sister had built something remarkable, but anger that I had deceived them. I never said I was broke, I replied calmly. You assumed I was broke because I chose to live modestly. Modestly? Tyler's voice was rising, drawing more attention from nearby tables. You let me lecture you about wasting your life. You sat there while I told you that you needed to get a real job, that you were living in a fantasy. You let me humiliate you in front of everyone. I didn't let you do anything, I said, my own voice hardening. You chose to humiliate me. You chose to attack my career and my life choices without knowing anything about them. Madison was shaking her head frantically. But this doesn't make sense. If you own this restaurant, if you're actually wealthy, then why do you dress like, she gestured at my navy dress. Why do you act like what? Like someone who doesn't need to prove her worth through designer labels and conspicuous consumption? The accusation hung in the air between us. Madison's face flushed red. Whether from embarrassment or anger, I couldn't tell. That's not fair, she said. We didn't know. How could we possibly know if you never told us? Because, I said, feeling years of frustration finally bubbling to the surface, every time I tried to share anything about my work, you dismissed it. Every time I mentioned a restaurant I was consulting for, you changed the subject. You weren't interested in my career unless it fit your narrative about my failures. Ashley leaned forward, trying to play peacemaker. Okay, but Emma, you have to understand how this looks from our perspective. We've been worried about you for years. We thought you were struggling, that you needed help. Did you? I asked. Or did you like thinking I was struggling? Did it make you feel better about your own choices to have me as the family failure? The question hit like a slap. Mom actually gasped. Derek's jaw tightened. Tyler looked like he might be sick. That's a horrible thing to say, Mom whispered. We love you. We've always wanted what's best for you. Have you? Because from where I'm sitting, it seems like you've spent the last decade using me as a cautionary tale. The daughter who chose passion over pragmatism and paid the price for it. Dad finally found his voice. Emma, that's not... We never meant... Didn't you? I pulled out my phone and opened my banking app, turning the screen toward them. The balance displayed was substantial enough to make Tyler physically recoil. I've been financially stable for years. More than stable. But every family gathering, you've treated me like I was one bad month away from moving back home. Because you never told us otherwise, Derek exploded, his professional composure finally cracking. You drive a 10-year-old Honda. You live in a one-bedroom apartment. You shop at Target. What were we supposed to think? You were supposed to ask, I said simply. You were supposed to be interested enough in my life to actually learn about it, instead of making assumptions. Madison was frantically scrolling through her phone. I'm looking up Le Bernardin online. It says here the owner is, oh my God, Emma Chen, food industry consultant and investor. Estimated net worth. She trailed off, her face going pale. How much? Tyler asked, his voice barely audible. Madison showed him the screen. I couldn't see the exact figure, but based on Tyler's expression, it was substantial. The financial blog she'd found was probably estimating based on Le Bernardin's success and my other known investments. The actual number was higher, but even the conservative estimate was clearly enough to shock them. This can't be real, Ashley said, but her voice lacked conviction. People don't just secretly own restaurants and not tell their families. Some people do, I said. Especially when their families have made it clear that they're only interested in certain types of success. The conversation was attracting more attention from other diners. A couple at the next table was openly staring, and I could see our server hovering nearby, probably wondering if he needed to intervene in what was clearly becoming a family crisis. So what? Tyler said, his earlier bravado replaced by something that looked like panic. You've been laughing at us this whole time? Sitting back and watching us worry about you while you were secretly rich? I wasn't laughing, I said. There was nothing funny about watching my family reduce me to a dollar amount every time we got together. Mom was crying now, quiet tears that she was trying to hide behind her napkin. Emma, honey, I don't understand why you would keep this from us. We're your family. We should have known. Should you? Because it seems like knowing the truth is making you angry, not happy for me. Derek leaned back in his chair, running his hands through his hair. This is insane. My sister secretly owns Le Bernardin. My sister, who I thought was barely making ends meet, is apparently worth... How much are you worth, Emma? Enough, I said. Enough that I've never needed your concern about my finances. Enough that I could have helped you with law school loans if you'd asked. Enough that I could have paid for Jessica's wedding if Mom and Dad had let me. The implications of what I was saying began to sink in. All the times they'd worried about me, all the times they'd offered small forms of help that I'd politely declined, all the times they'd celebrated their own successes while pitying my choices, it had all been based on a complete misunderstanding of my situation. But why? Mom asked through her tears. Why keep it secret? Why let us think? Because, I said, my voice finally breaking with emotion, I wanted you to love me for who I was, not what I was worth. I wanted you to be proud of my passion for food, my writing, my choices, even if you thought I was poor. I wanted to know that your support was real, not just an investment in my success. The table fell silent again. Around us, the restaurant continued its elegant evening service. But our little corner had become an island of raw emotion and shattered assumptions. Tyler was the first to speak, his voice hollow. I told you that you were living in a fantasy. I said you were wasting your life. I said. He covered his face with his hands. Oh, God, what did I say? You said exactly what you thought, I replied. About me? About my worth. About my contribution to this family. The only difference is that now you know I was listening from a position of strength, not weakness. The weight of their behavior throughout the evening, the casual dismissal of my career, the assumption that I needed their financial help, Tyler's cruel lecture about my failures, was finally hitting them. They were realizing that every condescending comment, every pitying look, every assumption about my limitations had been heard by someone who could have bought and sold them several times over. And in that realization, I could see something new growing in their expressions, not just shock or embarrassment, but fear. Fear of what else they might have gotten wrong. Fear of what I might do with this power they'd never known I possessed. Fear that the family dynamic they'd relied on for years was about to change forever. The silence stretched until Madison suddenly straightened in her chair, her expression shifting from shock to something more calculating. I recognized the look. It was the same expression she wore when she was planning her wedding, the focused intensity of someone who'd identified a problem and was already working on a solution. Okay, she said, her voice taking on that bright, managing tone she used when she wanted to control a situation. I think we need to take a step back here. This is obviously a huge misunderstanding, and everyone's emotions are running high. She reached across the table and placed her hand over mine with practiced sympathy. Emma, sweetie, I think what's happening here is that you're hurt because you felt like we didn't support your dreams. And I get that, I really do. But you have to understand our perspective too. I stared at her perfectly manicured hand covering mine, watching her attempt to reframe the entire evening as a simple miscommunication, rather than years of condescension and dismissal. We were worried about you, she continued, her voice gaining confidence as she warmed to her theme. We saw someone we loved making what looked like risky choices, and we wanted to protect you. That's not a bad thing, Emma, that's love. Derek nodded eagerly, clearly grateful that someone was offering a way to reinterpret their behavior. Madison's right. We were looking out for you. Maybe we could have been more supportive of your business ventures, but we were coming from a place of caring. Business ventures. Even now, even after learning that I owned one of Chicago's most successful restaurants, he couldn't bring himself to acknowledge my career as legitimate. It was still just a venture, something experimental and potentially foolish. Tyler, who had been silent since his moment of horror, suddenly found his voice again. This is actually a good thing, he said, his tone brightening with forced optimism. Now that we know the truth, we can finally treat Emma the way she deserves. We can include her in family investments, ask for her business advice. This could bring us all closer together. I watched this performance with fascination. In the span of 10 minutes, they'd gone from shock to denial, to what appeared to be acceptance. But what was really happening was more insidious. They were collectively rewriting the narrative of the evening to make themselves the victims of my deception rather than the perpetrators of years of subtle cruelty. And really, Ashley added, clearly emboldened by the group's new direction, Emma, you have to admit that keeping this secret was unfair to us. We've been walking on eggshells around you for years, worried about saying the wrong thing about money or success. The revisionist history was breathtaking. Walking on eggshells? They'd spent the entire evening making jokes about my financial situation and mocking my career choices. Mom, who had been quietly crying, suddenly looked up with renewed hope. That's right. Emma, honey, if we'd known you were doing so well, we could have celebrated your success instead of worrying about you. We could have been proud instead of concerned. You could have been proud anyway, I said quietly. You could have been proud that I was following my passion, that I was building something meaningful, that I was happy with my choices. You didn't need to know my net worth to support me. But that's not realistic, Derek said with the patience of someone explaining something obvious to a child. You have to understand that from the outside, your lifestyle looked concerning. Living in that small apartment, driving that old car, never going on vacations. We thought you were struggling. Because I chose to live below my means instead of flaunting my wealth? That's not what I'm saying, Derek replied, though his tone suggested it was exactly what he was saying. I'm just saying that if you'd been more open about your success, we could have adjusted our expectations. Madison squeezed my hand. The important thing is that we're having this conversation now. We can move forward with honesty and transparency. Maybe you could even invest in Derek's law firm when he makes partner. We could be business partners as well as family. There it was. The real reason for this sudden shift in tone. Now that they knew I had money, they wanted access to it. The concern about my welfare had evaporated, replaced by the calculating interest of people who'd discovered an untapped resource. Or, Tyler added with growing enthusiasm, you could help us all start a family business. A restaurant group, maybe. You've got the expertise, and we could provide the management structure. Think about the possibilities. Brad, who had been mostly quiet throughout the evening, finally spoke up. Emma, my firm handles investment portfolios for high-net-worth individuals. I'd love to discuss some opportunities with you. There are some really interesting hedge funds that might align with your risk tolerance. I pulled my hand away from Madison's grasp and looked around the table at their expectant faces. The transformation was complete. In the space of 20 minutes, I'd gone from family charity case to potential business partner. Their entire perception of me had shifted, not because they'd gained new respect for my choices or my character, but because they'd learned I had something they wanted. "You know what's interesting?" I said, my voice still calm but with an edge that made Tyler shift uncomfortably in his seat. "5 minutes ago, you were all concerned about my poor life choices and my need for a reality check. Now you want to be my business partners." "That's not fair," Mom protested. "We're trying to make things right. We're trying to move forward as a family." "Are you? Or are you trying to figure out how to benefit from information you just learned?" The accusation hung in the air like smoke. Ashley looked genuinely confused, as if she couldn't understand why I wasn't embracing their sudden change of heart. Madison's smile faltered slightly, but she maintained her composure. "Emma," Madison said, her voice taking on a slight edge of frustration, "I think you're being a little unfair here. Yes, we made some assumptions about your financial situation, but we're human, we make mistakes. The mature thing to do would be to accept our apology and move forward." "Have you apologized?" I asked, because I haven't heard an apology. I've heard explanations, justifications, and business propositions, but I haven't heard anyone actually apologize for their behavior. Derek cleared his throat. "Okay, fine. Emma, I apologize if anything we said tonight hurt your feelings. We were operating under false assumptions, and that led to some misunderstandings." "If anything we said hurt your feelings, if..." As though my reaction was an overinterpretation of their perfectly reasonable behavior. Tyler nodded eagerly. "Yeah, Emma, we're all sorry. We didn't know the full picture, and we said some things we probably shouldn't have. But now that we do know, we can do better." The apologies were coming now, but they were the hollow kind that people offer when they want something. Not because they understood the impact of their actions, but because they needed to clear the air so they could move on to more important matters, like figuring out how to access my wealth. "Actually," Madison said, her tone brightening as if she'd just had a brilliant idea, "this could be perfect timing. Derek and I have been looking at investment properties for after the wedding. Maybe you could advise us, or even co-invest. It would be a great way to combine family and business." Dad, who had been uncharacteristically quiet, suddenly perked up. "Emma, honey, your mother and I have been talking about retirement planning. Maybe we could set up a meeting to discuss some options? I know you're busy with your restaurant empire, but family comes first, right?" Restaurant empire. The phrase was delivered with a slight smile, as if he was making a gentle joke, but there was calculation behind it. He was testing whether I'd be willing to share my success with them now that they knew about it. "And really," Ashley added, "this explains so much about why you always seemed so calm about money. You never stressed about bills or expenses because you didn't have to. That must have been nice, not having to worry like the rest of us." The resentment was starting to show through their forced enthusiasm. Now that the shock was wearing off, they were beginning to feel foolish for having worried about me, and that foolishness was curdling into irritation that I'd let them worry unnecessarily. "You know what would be fun," Madison said, clearly trying to steer the conversation back to positive territory. "We should plan a family vacation. Somewhere really nice, since we all know now that Emma can afford it. Maybe Europe? I've always wanted to see the French Riviera." The presumption was staggering. We'd gone from them mocking my financial situation to them planning expensive vacations on my dime in the span of half an hour. Tyler was nodding enthusiastically. "That's a great idea. And Emma, you could write it all off as business research, right? Food and travel writing. It's perfect." They were already spending my money, already reorganizing their expectations around my wealth, already assuming that my resources were somehow communal property now that they knew about them. "I have an idea," I said, standing up from the table. "Why don't we take a break? I need some air." "Oh, that's a good idea," Mom said, misreading my tone entirely. "This has been a lot for all of us to process. But Emma, I want you to know how proud we are of what you've accomplished, even if we didn't always show it the right way." I looked down at her tear-stained face, at her expression of maternal pride that had materialized the moment she learned I was successful. Where had this pride been when she thought I was struggling? Where had it been when I needed her support rather than her pity? "I'll be right back," I said, walking away from the table before anyone could respond. As I made my way toward the restaurant's entrance, I could hear them talking in urgent whispers behind me. They thought they were planning how to repair our relationship, how to make amends for their earlier behavior. But what they were really doing was planning how to manage me, how to position themselves to benefit from the wealth they'd just discovered. They'd gone from seeing me as a problem to seeing me as an opportunity, and somehow they thought that was an improvement. I stepped outside into the cool October air and pulled out my phone. There was a message from Jessica. "How's the family dinner going? Still surviving?" I stared at the message for a long moment, then typed back, "It's been educational." Behind me, through the restaurant's windows, I could see my family huddled around the table, their heads together in animated discussion. They were probably strategizing, figuring out how to handle this new version of me, calculating how much support and enthusiasm they'd need to show to maintain access to my resources. They had no idea that they'd already lost me the moment they started trying to manage the situation instead of genuinely reckoning with their behavior. The real test wasn't whether they could accept that I was successful. The real test was whether they could love me for who I was, not what I could do for them. And they were failing spectacularly. I stood outside Le Bernardin for exactly 7 minutes, watching the Chicago skyline blur through the October mist, while my family undoubtedly planned their new approach to managing me. When I walked back inside, the hostess greeted me with the kind of professional concern reserved for valued customers who might be having a difficult evening. "Is everything all right, Ms. Patterson?" she asked quietly. "Everything's fine," I lied, then made my way back to table 12. They'd rearranged themselves while I was gone. Madison had moved to the seat next to mine, clearly positioning herself as the primary negotiator. Derek was leaning back in his chair with the satisfied expression of someone who'd just solved a complex problem. Tyler was scrolling through his phone with unusual focus, probably researching restaurant valuations or looking up more details about my supposed net worth. "Emma," Mom said brightly as I approached, "we've been talking, and we have so many ideas for how we can support your business ventures going forward." Business ventures. Still not my career, not my success, but ventures. As though what I'd built was experimental rather than established. "We realize we haven't been the best cheerleaders," Derek added with the kind of smile he probably used with difficult clients. "But that changes now. We want to be involved, to help you grow whatever you've started here." I sat down slowly, taking in their expectant faces. They'd clearly reached some kind of consensus while I was outside, developed a strategy for moving forward that would benefit everyone involved. "That's generous of you," I said. "What exactly did you have in mind?" Madison leaned forward eagerly. "Well, first, we think you should move out of that tiny apartment. There's a beautiful condo development in Lincoln Park that Derek and I looked at. 2 bedrooms, 2 baths, much more appropriate for someone in your position." "My position?" "You know," she said with a wave of her hand, "successful business owner, restaurant proprietor. You need a space that reflects your success. We could even help you decorate. I have an eye for interior design." Tyler looked up from his phone. "And you should definitely upgrade your car. That Honda is like 10 years old." "What does it say about Le Bernardin if the owner is driving around in a beat-up economy car?" "It says I'm practical," I replied, but Tyler was already shaking his head. "It says you don't understand branding. Image matters in the restaurant business. You should be driving something that reflects the quality of your establishment. BMW, Mercedes, maybe even a Tesla." Ashley nodded enthusiastically. "Tyler's right, and you should definitely update your wardrobe too. No offense, Emma, but that dress is very understated. Successful women dress for success. I could take you shopping. I know all the best boutiques." I looked around the table at these people who'd spent years dismissing my choices, who were now eagerly offering to reshape every aspect of my life to match their vision of what success should look like. "You want me to change my apartment, my car, and my wardrobe," I said slowly. "Anything else?" "Well," Dad said with the cautious optimism of someone testing dangerous waters, "we were thinking you might want to consider expanding your social circle. Derek knows a lot of successful young professionals through the law firm. It would be good for networking, and honestly, Emma, you've been pretty isolated lately." "Isolated?" Mom jumped in quickly. "Not isolated in a bad way, honey, just focused on work. But now that we know how successful you are, maybe it's time to start dating again." Derek's colleague Marcus just made senior associate. He's very handsome and he drives a Porsche. The suggestion hung in the air like a neon sign advertising everything that was wrong with their understanding of who I was and what I wanted. You want to set me up with someone because he drives a Porsche? I said. It's not about the car, Derek said quickly. It's about ambition, success, shared values. Marcus works 80-hour weeks, he's on the partner track, he understands the pressures of building a career. Like you, Madison added with a bright smile, you two would have so much in common, both successful, both driven, both in demanding fields. Brad, who had been quiet during this planning session, finally spoke up. Emma, I've been thinking about your investment portfolio. With the kind of income you must be generating from the restaurant, you're probably not optimizing your tax situation. My firm could help you establish some offshore accounts, maybe set up a trust structure. Offshore accounts? It's completely legal, he assured me quickly. Lots of high net worth individuals use them for tax efficiency. And with the right trust structure, you could minimize estate taxes while maximizing growth potential. Tyler was nodding approvingly. That's smart thinking. Emma, you've done great building the business, but now you need to think about wealth management. You can't just keep everything in checking accounts. I hadn't said anything about keeping money in checking accounts, but Tyler seemed to assume that because I'd been living modestly, I must be financially naive. We could even set up a family investment fund, Madison suggested, her voice taking on the excited tone she used when discussing wedding plans. Pool our resources, leverage your expertise in the hospitality industry. Think about the possibilities. A chain of restaurants, maybe a food truck business, catering services. A food truck business? I repeated. Well, diversification, she said, as if this were obvious. You can't put all your eggs in one basket. What if the fancy dining trend changes? What if people stop wanting expensive French food? The ignorance was breathtaking. She was suggesting that I diversify away from my successful restaurant into food trucks, as though I were a novice who'd gotten lucky once and needed their guidance to sustain it. And really, Ashley added, this could be perfect timing for all of us. Tyler's been looking at franchise opportunities. Brad's firm is always looking for investors. Derek will need capital when he starts his own practice someday. We could all help each other. There it was again. The assumption that my success was somehow communal property, that discovering my wealth meant they were entitled to share in it. You've got this all figured out, I said, my voice carefully neutral. We're just excited, Mom said, reaching over to pat my hand. We're excited to finally understand what you've been building, and we want to be part of it. That's what families do. They support each other. Is that what families do? I asked. Because for the past several years, your version of support has involved mocking my career choices and treating me like a charity case. The mood at the table shifted uncomfortably. Derek cleared his throat. Emma, we've already apologized for that. We've acknowledged that we made some mistakes. But dwelling on the past isn't productive. We need to focus on moving forward. Moving forward, I repeated. With you managing my image, my living situation, my social life, and my investment portfolio. We're offering to help, Madison said, a slight edge creeping into her voice. We're trying to make up for our earlier misunderstandings. I don't know why you're being so resistant to that. Tyler put down his phone and looked at me directly. Honestly, Emma, I'm starting to think you're enjoying this. You're enjoying having something to hold over us, some way to make us feel bad about caring about you. The accusation was so backward, so completely inverted from reality that I actually laughed. You think I'm enjoying this? A little bit, yeah, he said, his tone growing more confident. You've been sitting there all evening, letting us worry about you, letting us feel guilty about your situation, when you knew the whole time that you were better off than any of us. Ashley nodded. That's actually kind of cruel, Emma. We've been genuinely concerned about you for years, and you've been secretly laughing at us. Laughing at you? Well, what would you call it? Tyler demanded. You let me give you that whole speech about getting your life together, about finding a real career, about contributing something meaningful. You sat there and took it when you knew it was all completely wrong. Derek leaned forward. Tyler has a point, Em. I mean, I understand wanting privacy about your finances, but letting us think you were struggling when you weren't? That's pretty manipulative. The word hit like a physical blow. Manipulative. Because I hadn't corrected their assumptions about my life? Because I'd let them reveal their true feelings about my worth as a person? I was manipulative. You think I'm manipulative, I said slowly. Maybe that's too strong a word, Mom said quickly, shooting Derek a warning look. But honey, you have to admit that keeping this secret has caused a lot of unnecessary worry and misunderstandings. Misunderstandings, I repeated. Is that what we're calling Tyler's lecture about my failed life? A misunderstanding? Tyler's face flushed. Okay, I went too far with that, I admit it. But Emma, you have to see this from our perspective. We thought we were looking out for someone we cared about. We thought we were trying to help someone who was struggling. And now that you know I'm not struggling, now we want to actually help, Madison said earnestly. Now we want to support your success instead of worrying about your failures. The conditional nature of their support was laid bare in that sentence. They wanted to support my success, not me. They were willing to celebrate my achievements, not my choices. They could love the version of me that made money, not the version that followed her passion. So let me understand this, I said, my voice growing quieter and more dangerous. For years, you've treated me like a disappointment because you thought I was poor. Now you want to redesign my entire life because you've learned I'm rich. And you think this represents an improvement in our relationship. The silence that followed was profound. Around us, other diners continued their pleasant Saturday evening conversations, unaware that at table 12, a family was disintegrating in real time. Emma, Derek said finally, his lawyer instincts kicking in as he realized how their position sounded when stated so plainly. We're not. You're not people who judge others based on their bank account balance? Because that's exactly what you are. The only difference is that you used to pity me for being poor, and now you want to control me for being rich. Tyler's face had gone white. Ashley was staring at her hands. Madison looked like she was trying to formulate an argument that would salvage the situation. But I was done. Done with their explanations, done with their justifications, done with their management strategies and business propositions and conditional love. I stood up from the table for the second time that evening, but this time I didn't announce that I needed air. This time I was ready to show them exactly who they'd been underestimating. I walked away from table 12 without a word, leaving my family sitting in stunned silence. But instead of heading for the exit, I turned toward the kitchen. Several diners looked up as I passed, probably wondering why a customer was walking through the restaurant with such obvious purpose. The kitchen doors swung open as I approached, and I stepped into the controlled chaos of Saturday evening service. The familiar sounds of sizzling pans, shouted orders, and clinking plates surrounded me like a symphony I knew by heart. Jean-Luc looked up from where he was plating the final touches on a duck breast, surprise flickering across his face. Emma, is everything all right? The entire kitchen staff turned to look at me. Sous chefs, line cooks, prep assistants, all the people who made Le Bernardin function every night. They knew who I was, had worked with me for 2 years to build this restaurant into something extraordinary. To them, I wasn't Emma the struggling food blogger or Emma the family disappointment. I was simply the owner who trusted them to do excellent work. Jean-Luc, I said, my voice carrying clearly over the kitchen noise, I need to make an announcement to the dining room. He blinked, clearly caught off guard. An announcement? Emma, what kind of announcement? The kind that's long overdue. I could see him processing this, weighing the potential disruption to service against whatever he saw in my expression. After a moment, he nodded slowly. Of course. Would you like me to get everyone's attention? Please. Jean-Luc stepped out from behind the pass and moved toward the dining room. I followed, my heart pounding with a mixture of fear and exhilaration. Behind me, I could hear the kitchen staff whispering among themselves, but their voices seemed distant and unreal. The dining room fell quiet as Jean-Luc approached the center of the space. Conversations died mid-sentence, wine glasses paused halfway to lips, and even the servers stopped their graceful choreography between tables. Ladies and gentlemen, Jean-Luc announced in his clear, accented English, if I may have your attention for just a moment, the owner of Le Bernardin would like to say a few words. A murmur of interest rippled through the room. This was unusual. Restaurant owners rarely made public appearances during service, and when they did, it was typically to announce something significant. I stepped forward, acutely aware that every eye in the restaurant was on me. At table 12, my family was staring in horror, probably realizing that whatever was about to happen, they weren't going to be able to control it. "Good evening," I began, my voice steadier than I'd expected. "For those who don't know me, my name is Emma Chen, and I've had the privilege of owning Le Bernardin for the past 2 years." Another murmur, this one mixed with surprise and curiosity. The name Emma Chen was known in Chicago food circles, but most diners had never seen me in person. "I usually prefer to stay behind the scenes," I continued, "but tonight is special. Tonight I'm dining with my family, and they've just learned something that apparently comes as quite a shock, that their daughter and sister, who they believed was a struggling food blogger barely making ends meet, actually owns this restaurant." The murmur grew louder. This was definitely not the kind of announcement people expected during their Saturday evening dinner. At table 12, Derek had gone completely pale. Madison was furiously gesturing for me to stop, shaking her head with wide, panicked eyes. Tyler looked like he wanted to crawl under the table and disappear entirely. "You see," I went on, addressing the room but speaking directly to my family, "for years my family has been concerned about my poor life choices. They've worried about my financial situation, my career prospects, my failure to live up to their expectations of success." I could see other diners glancing toward table 12, trying to identify my family among the crowd. The expressions on my relatives' faces made them easy to spot. "They've offered me advice about getting a trab, finding a practical career, and generally getting my life together. They've been particularly concerned about my ability to afford experiences like dining at fine restaurants." A few people in the dining room were beginning to smile, sensing the irony of the situation. "In fact," I continued, my voice growing stronger, "just this evening, one of my family members gave me a lecture about how food blogging isn't a real career, how I'm living in a fantasy, and how I should look at the chef and staff here as examples of what actual success in the food industry looks like." Several diners were now openly grinning, and I could see phones being discreetly pulled out to record what was clearly becoming a memorable moment. He told me that I was wasting my life writing about restaurants I probably couldn't afford to eat at regularly. He suggested that I was an embarrassment to my family, someone who'd chosen passion over practicality and was paying the price for it. Tyler had actually slumped in his chair, his face buried in his hands. "But here's the thing about assumptions," I said, addressing the entire dining room now. "They reveal more about the person making them than about the person they're directed toward." I paused, letting the words sink in. My family spent years treating me like a charity case, because they equated modest living with financial failure. They assumed that because I drove an older car and lived in a small apartment, I must be struggling. They never considered that I might simply have different priorities, or that success might look different from what they expected. The dining room was completely silent now, everyone captivated by this unusual dinner theater. Tonight they learned that I'm not struggling. In fact, I've been quite successful. And do you know what their first reaction was? Not pride in my achievements, not joy at my happiness, but anger that I'd deceived them, followed immediately by suggestions about how I should spend my money on them. I could see several diners nodding in recognition, probably thinking of their own family dynamics and financial relationships. They want to help me invest my money, upgrade my lifestyle, expand my social circle to include more appropriate people. They've offered to manage my image, redecorate my apartment, and set me up with men who drive expensive cars. A woman at table 6 actually laughed out loud, quickly covering her mouth when she realized how quiet the room was. Because you see, they don't actually have a problem with my career or my choices. They have a problem with poverty. They were embarrassed by what they perceived as my failure, and now they're embarrassed by their own reaction to my success. I looked directly at table 12, where my family sat frozen in mortification. The truth is, I let them believe what they wanted to believe about my financial situation because I wanted to know who they really were. I wanted to know if their love and support were conditional on my bank account balance. The silence in the dining room was profound. And now I know. I turned back to address the entire restaurant. So let this be a lesson to all of us about the assumptions we make about success, about failure, about the people we love. Sometimes the person you're pitying is actually the person you should be learning from. Sometimes the family member you think needs your charity is the one who's been quietly carrying the family on their back. I paused, letting my eyes sweep across the dining room one final time. Thank you for your attention, and please, enjoy the rest of your evening. The dessert course tonight is particularly exceptional. The applause started slowly, from a couple at table 8, then spread through the dining room until nearly everyone was clapping. Some people were standing, others were raising their wine glasses in a toast. The energy in the room was electric, as if they'd witnessed something historic. I nodded to Jean-Luc, who was watching with a mixture of pride and amazement, then turned to walk back toward the kitchen. But before I reached the doors, I made one final stop at table 12. My family looked up at me with expressions of pure horror. They'd just been publicly humiliated in front of a room full of Chicago's elite, their behavior exposed and dissected for entertainment. "Emma," Mom whispered, tears streaming down her face, "how could you do this to us?" I looked down at her, this woman who'd raised me but never really seen me, and felt something that was neither anger nor sadness, but a kind of profound clarity. "I didn't do this to you," I said quietly, my voice pitched so only they could hear. "You did this to yourselves. Every assumption, every dismissive comment, every moment you treated me like I was less than enough, that was your choice." Derek tried to speak, but I held up a hand. "You want to know the really sad part? I would have helped you with anything you needed. Law school loans, wedding costs, down payments, investments, anything. But you never asked Emma the person for help. You just assumed Emma the failure couldn't provide it." I reached into my purse and pulled out a business card. My real business card, with my real name and real title. "Emma Chen, principal owner, Chen Hospitality Group," I said, placing it on the table. "In case you ever want to get to know who I actually am instead of who you assumed I was." Tyler finally looked up, his face streaked with tears. "Emma, please. We can fix this. We can make this right." "Can you?" I asked. "Can you go back and love me when you thought I was poor? Can you go back and support my dreams when you thought they weren't profitable? Can you go back and treat me with respect when you thought I had nothing to offer?" The silence that followed was answer enough. I didn't think so. I straightened up and looked around the table one last time at these people who'd shared my childhood, my history, my name, but who had never really known me at all. "The bill has been taken care of," I said. "Consider it my gift to Derek for his birthday, and my gift to myself for finally understanding that family isn't about blood. It's about who shows up for you when they think you have nothing to give back." I walked away then, through the kitchen, out the back door and into the cool Chicago night. Behind me, Le Bernardin continued its Saturday evening service, the staff seamlessly returning to their routines after the most unusual announcement in the restaurant's history. My phone was already buzzing with notifications. Social media posts from diners who'd recorded my speech, messages from industry contacts who'd heard about what happened, missed calls from numbers I didn't recognize. But I ignored them all and walked to my 10-year-old Honda, which had carried me faithfully through years of building my empire, while my family worried about my poor life choices. As I drove home to my small apartment, which had been the perfect size for someone who spent most of her time working in restaurants anyway, I thought about the look on Tyler's face when he realized what he'd done. I thought about Madison's panic gestures as she tried to stop me from speaking. I thought about my parents' tears, Derek's horror, Ashley's shock. But mostly I thought about the applause, the recognition from a room full of strangers that sometimes the truth is worth telling, even when it's uncomfortable. Especially when it's uncomfortable. For the first time in years, I felt completely free. Free from their expectations, their assumptions, their conditional love. Free to be exactly who I was, successful, passionate, and entirely capable of determining my own worth. My phone buzzed with a text from Jessica in Portland. "Mom called crying. Something about you owning a restaurant and embarrassing the family. Call me when you can. P.S. I'm proud of you." I smiled and drove home, finally understanding that the family I'd been born into wasn't necessarily the family I was meant to keep. And that was perfectly fine with me. 6 months later, Le Bernardin received its second Michelin star. The review mentioned the restaurant's authentic commitment to excellence and praised the genuine passion evident in every aspect of the dining experience. I framed that review and hung it in my new office, not because I needed validation, but because it represented something pure. Success that had nothing to do with bank balances or family approval or meeting other people's expectations. It was just good work, recognized and appreciated. And sometimes, that's the only applause you really need. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.